Hey, welcome to church. If you have a Bible, we'll be starting a new chapter today, Matthew chapter 6. My name is Josh Carstensen. I get to serve as the lead pastor here. As we get going today, how many of you, just curious, this is really just for my own personal sake, how many of you set an alarm to wake up this morning? Wow, that's a lot. How many of you, when setting your alarm last night, just had a little bit of anxiety wondering if your phone was going to adjust to the time? Yeah. Me too. I don't ever set an alarm except for Sunday mornings. Like my body just wakes up 5:45 every day except for Sundays. So I got to wake up at 5, set the alarm. Last night, set the alarm, was like, is it going to adjust? If it does, I'll be able to study and write a sermon ahead of time. If it doesn't, I guess we'll just see what happens. Got the sermon written this morning. Joking, I didn't actually write it this morning. But yeah, welcome. I have a question as we're getting into this text. Have you ever got caught doing something that you were actually kind of happy that you got caught doing it? Right, let me describe. There are certain things that if someone walked into your house, let's say you're home alone and maybe you're married and your spouse comes, or maybe your parents come, or you have a friend or a roommate come over, and they catch you like doing something nice for someone else. And you're like, oh, I'm glad they saw me doing this. Or like maybe you were cleaning someone else's room, or you were making something. There's certain things that you can think of that you're like, oh yeah, I'm actually kind of glad that you got to see me doing that. There are other things that you could be doing that like you wouldn't necessarily want to get caught doing, right? Like typically, like if you're laying on the couch and you're just doom scrolling, I don't think you're like super excited that someone like walked into, or just like, I'm just aimlessly wasting my life, right? I'm supposed to be doing homework and I'm doing anything but that. Maybe I'm just watching whatever latest things on Netflix, and no one's excited about like someone, walking in and you're watching TV. Like you don't feel that great about yourself. You're kind of just like, I'm kind of just wasting my life. What if, right? You're welcome. If you watch too much TV, shame on you. We all have things that we need shame on. But that's not why you came to church. So if someone came into your house while you were reading your Bible, like legit, you're having a Bible study, it's just you and the Lord, and someone walked in, how you feeling? You're actually probably feeling pretty good, right? There's a small part of you that goes like, oh, it's kind of cool that someone saw me doing this. Let's say you were downtown and you were helping meet a food need of someone. You're handing out a burrito, maybe you're praying for someone, and a coworker drives by and they see you doing that. Like there's kind of a small part of us that goes like, oh, that's kind of cool that they saw me doing that. And it's actually really cool that I didn't even mean for them to see me do that. And I kind of got credit for it, even though like I didn't try, right? This is church, we can be honest. Am I the only one that kind of feels good? Yeah, when we do good things and people see us doing good things, even if it's not necessarily on purpose, like there's a part of us that actually feels okay. It's like, yeah, that's great. You ever shown up to volunteer somewhere and someone else showed up and you're like, oh, I'm actually kind of glad that they're here, that they get to see me volunteering here as well, right? No one? All right, well, maybe I'm alone in my confession. It's interesting, though, because when we talk about doing good things and other people seeing us do good things, isn't that kind of what the last 6 weeks have been here studying, going through the Sermon on the Mount? Right? If you remember in chapter 5, verse 14, Jesus gave us this challenge. He gave us this call. To summarize it a little bit, he says, your life is like salt and light. Right? I want you to live in a certain way that people will see your life. They will see your life. They will see how you live. They will see your good works. And what? They will glorify your Father who is in heaven, right? You see that text up there. Matthew 5:14. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Don't hide your life. Nor do people light a lamp, put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine, right? Those are big kind of like heavenly words to say this. He brings it down so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven, right? And then we looked at 6 different statements that Jesus made to fill out this example, to say, here's things that I want you to do that I want other people to see you doing, right? And they're hard things, right? He gave us all this challenge. You have heard what is said, but I say to you, and he gives us this challenge, and he says, I want you to not be angry with people, and I want other people to see that you're not angry with other people, right? So not only do I want you to live this way, I want people to know it. I want them to experience this. I want them to know this about you, and I want them to know the reason why you do it is because you're a follower of mine, right? And he goes on, and Jesus gives us 6 different statements of here's things that I want you to do, and I want you to do them out loud, right? You might remember some of the different things that he called us to do, right? I want you to be faithful to your spouse, like wildly faithful, right? I don't want you, I don't want you quitting on marriage easily. Right? I want you to hold on to your word with radical integrity. So when you say you're going to do something, I want you to do it, and I want people to know that you are someone to be trusted. I want that to be true about you. I want you to not just like your friends, but I want you to love your enemies. And again, I want people to know this about you. So there's a part of us over the last little bit where Jesus is saying, I want you to live your faith out loud because, to use a simple analogy, you're like an advertisement for the Lord. Like your life, like God's living through you, the way that you live, people will know me, right? So that should beg a really good question of us, right? Is that true of me, right? When people look at my life, when they see how I do the things that I do, when they see how I spend my time, when they see how I treat people, like, am I giving a good advertisement for the Lord? Right? That should be true. Am I living with integrity? Am I working hard? Right? Am I a person of honor? Do I love people well? Is this true? But now Jesus today, as we enter into a new chapter, he's going to completely change the story. He's going to say, actually, I don't want you to live your life out loud. I want you to live it really quietly. Right? Which in some ways is really confusing. Well, do you want me to live my life out loud so that everyone can see, or do you want me to hide everything? Listen to this. This is Matthew 6:1. We're going to get into it in a minute, and we're all going to stand in a little bit, but I just want you to hear the opening words of chapter 6, verse 1. He says, beware of practicing your righteousness, right? That's good works. That's goodness, your right standing before God. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Well, what is it? Am I supposed to practice my good works in front of other people, or am I supposed to be silent about them? Right? It seems a little bit different than what we've been studying over the last number of weeks. So when I'm reading my Bible, should I let the world know that I'm having a nice, quiet time next to the fire with my PJs on and my flat white, #blessed? Should I let everyone know that? Right? Should I let everyone know that I helped pay someone's rent last month? Right? Should I? Should I let people know that I'm helping someone who's new to faith, and I'm just like, hey, why don't you come with me? We're going to study the Bible together. Like, should I tell people that? That's a good question, right? Should I let other people know, like, hey, here's what I'm doing for my spiritual disciplines. This is what my fasting looks like. This is what my workout routine looks like. That's not really spiritual discipline, but that's still another brag. Like, here's what my life looks like. Should I let everyone know? Jesus is going to say there are certain things in your life that I want you to hide. Should I live my faith out loud, or should I hide it? There's a little statement that I want to make that I think will help us with this as we get into this over the next month. In our flesh, when we are tempted to live our life out loud, I think Jesus is going to say, I want you to hide it. And when we're tempted to hide something, Jesus is going to say, I want you to live it out loud. Right? So we think about these areas that we just talked about over the last 6 weeks. And for most of us, I think the natural temptation would be, I don't want to advertise that to the world, primarily because I know that I'm going to fail often. So I don't want to tell everyone, hey guys, I really love my enemies. Like, I'm really good at this, because when we fail at that, we'll look like a fool, and we don't want to be a hypocrite. So the tendency is like, well, maybe I'm not going to say anything. And Jesus is like, no, I want you to say something. I want the accountability. I want you to speak out loud. I want people to know who I am. I want them to know what drives you. But then today, we're going to get to this whole other area where it's going to be easy for us to naturally want to say, hey, guys, it's not a big deal, but like I'm discipling 4 people. I mean, it's not a big deal, but I'm on like a streak of 17 months of reading the Bible. It's not a big deal, but I gave 11% last year, and that was net. Not a big deal, but if we were to have like a little plaque of attendance, like I'd be in the top 5. Feeling pretty good about that. And the tendency would be, again, to like say that out loud, and Jesus is going to say, no. Like I want you to be quiet about that. And why? It's just interesting as we get into this chapter, it's really a gut punch in a lot of ways. It's a gut punch because Jesus is going to say, hey, I actually want to see your motivations of why you're doing what you're doing. And I want, maybe even more than me, because I actually know your motivations, I want you to see your motivations. I want you to know why you're doing what you're doing. Are you doing these things to get the approval of men? Because if you are, that's what you're going to get. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. And it's not that great. All right, the approval of men is temporary, it's cheap, it's quick. I'm going to use the word chintzy. Right? But God's going to say, hey, I've got something better for you. And I want you to see your own heart. What's motivating you? So why are you following me? Are you following me to get the approval of others? Are you following me to get, the applaud of men? Or are you following me when no one else sees? And that's the only way that you'll know what's really going on down here, when no one else sees. Right? So today, and over the next number of weeks, we're going to get into what Jesus says about how we are to live our life in secret. And again, it's a gut punch. This chapter is one of the biggest gut punches. I think Martin Lloyd-Jones, who is, I think, the greatest commentator on the Sermon on the Mount, he has this statement, and I'm going to read it. It's a bit of a doozy. Maybe for your sake, I won't read the whole thing, but I'm going to read part of it. He says this. He says, we may well realize at the outset that this chapter 6 is, again, a very searching one. Indeed, we can go further and say that it's a very painful one. Right? So just like prepare ourselves for this. I sometimes think that this is one of the most uncomfortable chapters to read in the entire scriptures. It probes and examines and holds a mirror up before us, and it will not allow us to escape. There is no chapter which is more calculated to promote self-humbling and humiliation than this particular one, but thank God for it. He's saying, when we read this chapter, it's going to hurt a little bit, but thank God that pain's actually a good thing. The Christian should always be anxious to know himself. No other man truly wants to know himself. The natural man thinks he knows himself and thereby reveals his basic trouble. He evades self-examination because to know oneself is ultimately the most painful piece of knowledge that a man can ever acquire. And here is a chapter that brings us face to face with ourselves and enables us to see ourselves exactly as we are. But I repeat, thank God for it. Because it is only the man who has truly seen himself for what he is who is likely to fly to Christ and to seek to be filled with the Spirit of God, who alone can burn out of him the vestiges of self and everything that tends to mar his Christian life and living. In the next chapter, we're going to see Jesus say, I want you to examine your heart, and I want you to examine it by doing a few things. Number one, I want you to be silent when you give to those in need. Right? And that's what we're going to touch on today. When you give to those in need, I want you to be silent. Right? He's going to say, when you pray, right? I want that between me and you. I don't want you going and telling everyone, hey, I got a hot streak on my prayer. Things are going great. He says, when you fast, right? When you commit to spiritual disciplines, I don't want you to tell people. So he has us examine ourselves, our spiritual life. And then he says, not only are we going to examine yourselves through these spiritual disciplines and our tendencies to want to tell everyone, I'm going to get really deep. And he's going to say, how are you doing with your money? We're going to continue to talk about money. Jesus talks about it all the time. And then he say, not only are we going to talk about your money, let's talk about anxiety, right? And I didn't just bring up that word. Like Jesus brought it up a couple thousand years ago, right? Where is your trust? Are you okay with like letting go of control? We're going to see, again, in the depths of our soul. So as we do this, we're going to open it up to generosity to the poor. If you would you stand with me? We're going to read verses 1 through 4. Today's a bit of an intro, so we're kind of just introing this whole topic as we talk about giving to the poor and being quiet about it. After I'm done, I'm going to say, this is the word of the Lord. And we do that to honor God's word. and you can respond with thanks be to God. So this is Matthew 6, verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You can grab a seat. I love how practical Jesus is. He's very straightforward here. This isn't just like, hey, I want you to love God with your life and your money. He's like, no, here's how you can do it. It's very practical. And so we're just going to work through 4 observations, one at a time. Observation number 1, the assumption of giving. Okay, chapter 6, verse 2. Thus, when you give to the needy. Jesus, 2,000 years ago, he's speaking to a large crowd of people, and he just makes an assumption. He doesn't make the argument here. He doesn't make a case. He doesn't plea his case. He doesn't plea his point of view. He simply says, when you give to the needy, assuming that they know that this is a practice that they all do, right? So today, I'm not going to plead the case. I'm not going to tell us why we should do it, but over and over and over, Jesus makes the case. And he talks about the correlation between money and our desires and power and control and trust and fear and anxiety. We're going to look at that over the next couple of weeks, particularly I think 3 weeks from now, we're going to dive into that. But here he just assumes it, right? He's speaking to a culture who God promoted this a long time ago. So people have been practicing this for thousands of years at this point, right? And they primarily gave in 2 different ways. So when you think about giving to the needy, there's different ways that they did it, and there's different ways that we do it. Primarily for them, there's institutional giving and there's individual giving, right? What do I mean by that? Institutionally, this nation, it was a theocracy. They lived as their own sovereign nation, but this nation also collectively worshiped God together. And collectively, they had different ways of giving to support the nation's needs, to support the church's needs as they worked together, and to support the needs of the poor. Right? Primarily, the big word that was used back then was called a tithe. There were different types of tithes. A tithe just meant 10%. And so this nation collectively, institutionally, gave different tithes to support the nation. Right? We see this through a Levitical tithe. The Levitical tithe was primarily, think of it as like, let's keep the church moving. Let's keep it going forward. They did this through festival tithes, right? A festival tithe was something that they gathered from people to have big parties to celebrate the goodness of God. They did that annually. On top of that, they had tithes for the poor. But then primarily what Jesus is talking about today isn't necessarily tithes, but he's talking about offerings. He's talking about individuals giving to individuals who have needs. And so they gave on top of the tithes different offerings simply to reflect the heart of God that sees people in their need and meets those needs. Right? These offerings, again, they weren't primarily done through the church. They weren't primarily done through the temple. They weren't primarily done institutionally. They were done kind of as a as seen, as needed basis. Like, hey, I see someone in need, and I'm going to give to this person in need. So this type of giving we're talking about is kind of this individual type of giving. Again, it was assumed that they would do it. We see this type of giving from the heart of God all over Scripture. And I'm going to read a few scriptures just to kind of give us a frame of reference from what Jesus is talking about. This goes all the way back. This is about 1,500 years before Jesus. Deuteronomy chapter 15. Listen to the words God gave to Moses. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land. Right? God doesn't say, well, I really want you to do a deep analysis onto whether or not they worked hard enough. I want you to do a deep analysis as to, where, are they going to use this money wisely? He just makes a broad statement. He says, there's always going to be poor people. There's always going to be people who are struggling. And your job as a follower of mine is to care for these folks. Leviticus 19, he gives a very practical way for landowners to take care of those who have physical needs, primarily via food. Leviticus 19, verses 9 through 10. when you reap the harvest of your land, right? So, hey, when the corn's up, I guess you can't really eat grass seed, whatever harvest it is, hazelnuts, apples, whatever. Basically, he says, you shall not reap your field right up to the edge. Neither shall you gather the gleanings after you harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare. Neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. He's saying, like, don't take everything for yourself. Leave some for other people. Right? Leave some. We got a farmer in here who practically does that. He brings in something to the church office every time he does something. I think it's great. Appreciate that. You know who you are. Right? But again, this principle is much broader in the world that we live in today. He's not primarily just talking about if you're a landowner who grows things, but what does it look like to not live off of every dime that you could possibly make and give to those who are in need? Deuteronomy 24 has a very similar sentiment. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, the widow, and that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. That last little statement I think is important. That the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. I want to give a sermon on that, but it's something to think about. Proverbs 19:17. Listen to this. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. Man, if that doesn't hit, I don't know what does. Right, Psalm 41:1, blessed is the one who considers the poor. In the day of trouble, the Lord delivers him. God's heart is always for the poor, the outcast, those in need. Right? Constantly, we're going to see Jesus in the New Testament talk about giving. We're going to talk about those who have need. We're going to talk about money over and over. Regularly, the New Testament talks about this. Right? I think 15% of Jesus' words directly talk about money and possessions because how we use the things that God gives us really shows what's in our heart. Right? And God commands us, take care of those around you. And so as we think about this, the assumption is that we're giving. Right? And it's not just you're giving if you got your life figured out. It's not just like, okay, well, financially I'm doing great, therefore I have excess. Right? The assumption here, you think about who's hearing these words, it's not a bunch of like upper middle class folks who are doing great, who've got retirement all figured out, and who do like a great Hawaiian vacation every 6 months. Right? That's not who's hearing these words. Right? This is a vast crowd, and the assumption is that everyone can find someone in need. Right? So maybe you're a high school kid here. I guess you're probably not here. You're probably with the high school kids. Maybe you're a college kid. Right? You may be hungry. You may have come to church for the great snacks, right? And we got pretty good snacks. You serve 3 hours and you get the secret breakfast in E4. There's someone who is in greater need than you, right? This is for everyone. There is someone who has needs, right? And the call for everyone, the assumption is that we're giving. Number 2, the chintzy prize of self-promotion. Verse 2, thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. Now, there's debate as to whether or not this was actually a thing. Most people think Jesus is just saying something so ridiculous just to prove the point, right? The point would be like, hey, I got a friend, Jimmy, and it's like it's Giving Sunday, so he walks in and he's like, doo-doo-doo-doo. Hey guys, I just want you to know Jimmy's going to make a nice donation today. We're going to be able to have some better snacks next week, so could we all just give it up for Jimmy? Like that would be ridiculous. We would all feel so uncomfortable. Right? And that's the point Jesus is saying. It's like, that's insane. We don't do that. However, some of us have the tendency of wanting to do that. Right? And we're not just talking about in person, live. We're talking about it actually sometimes does feel good to have people know what we're doing. Right? Sometimes it does feel good. Maybe you throw on social media, hey, I got to help out orphans this summer. Right? Hey, I'm doing this mission trip. Hey, got to help out my local community over here. I was serving down at Southside Youth Outreach. Just want you guys to see this picture of me. Right? That hits a little closer to home sometimes. Right? Hey, I'm mentoring these kids. Did you guys see that? Did you see my picture on there, or you just happened to drop it in conversation? Yeah, I was just out last week and kind of helping some people here, or you're helping with the GoFundMe, and instead of hitting the anonymous button, you're like, it doesn't hurt to let people know, even if it's $10, maybe it's $100, maybe they'll see like that I'm really a generous person, right? And Jesus says, when you do that, what's your reward? It's not that there's no reward. There's a reward, but it's not what you think it is. The reward is simply just the like that you get online. It feels good temporarily. You're like, oh, cool. A few people saw that I did something great. That's my reward. And that's it. That's all you get. A momentary applause. It's not nothing, but Jesus says it's not what you think it is. Like you think that when you let people know what you're doing, you think that it's going to feel good, and the truth is it feels good momentarily, maybe, but I've got something better for you. Quick note, by the way, I know it's not giving to the poor, but I think we do this all the time with social media. Like, I am the biggest advocate against social media, against posting pictures of like, hey, look at all the cool things I do, because here's what we're asking for. We're asking for applause. Do-do-do-do, look what I did. I just went to Cabo. Do-do-do-do, look what I did. Aren't you jealous of how awesome my life is? Do-do-do-do. And the reward you get is simply just that. It's this cheap little like, right? But Jesus is saying, hey, like, why don't you be quiet about your life? Like, there's a better reward, obviously, particularly when it comes to giving to those in need. He goes on and he makes a kind of a little bit more interesting point in verse 3, hiding from myself. He says, but when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Now, I don't know about you, but that feels really hard. How can I keep a secret from myself? Like, as I get older, sometimes I feel like I can do that because I forget things. Last night, my wife and I were having a conversation, and I'm like, I feel like we had an argument recently, and I'm trying to remember what it was about. Can you help me remember what this was about? She was quickly able, she had a better memory than me, not like she's holding on to something, but she helped me remember. But what's Jesus saying here? Your right hand not knowing what your left hand is doing. He's saying there is a temptation in not just letting other people know what you're doing in terms of giving to the needy, but there's a temptation in you knowing what you've done to feel really good about what you've done. Right? So if you give or you serve in a certain way, there is a temptation to look into that mirror and be like, oh, hey, man, that was really cool what you did last month. Feeling pretty good. All right, that $100 you gave, man, you Jesus philanthropist, you, that 100,000 you gave. And there's a part of us that if we're not careful, we can feel really good about the things that we've done. And so how do we hide those things from ourselves? Right? Here's where, like, I don't have just a blanket rule, because the fact of the matter is the way that I'm going to hide something from me is going to be different from how you hide something from you. Right? It just looks different for all of us. I can give a few simple broad ideas. Right? I think sometimes to take control away from us directly having impact in how we give, because I think sometimes we like that. I think we like knowing if I give my dollar here, here's what happens. I think if there's a temptation in you to do that, maybe think about, how do I give more broadly? How do I give anonymously? Right? How do I give to an organization that I know they're going to do the good work, but I don't need to get the credit for it? Right? So that may be, I'm going to give money to Love Inc. because I know that Love Inc. is going to do something, because if I give something directly, my heart is just going to want to take credit for that. Right? And it's easier to give to something else that I know they're going to do a good job. Right? Here at Northwest Hills, we have a care fund. This care fund directly goes to people who are in need. It doesn't go to facilities. It doesn't go to my new shoe account. It doesn't go to anything other than, right, helping needs. And so maybe you're going, hey, I want to give to the care fund. Right? By the way, if you know anyone who has needs, real physical needs, we want to meet those needs. Let us know about it. We're always trying to help people who have needs. But just ask yourself the question, how can I hide from myself? Right? It's not an easy question. It's a hard one. It takes a little bit of homework. It takes homework to really know yourself, to know where am I tempted, to be impressed with myself. Like, that takes some real soul work. But Jesus is saying, do the soul work to know where you're tempted by yourself to feel good about the things that you're doing. And then lastly, we'll end with this. The prize that we all want. It's interesting because there actually is a prize here. And we should want this prize. And I don't believe that this is an eternal rewards prize. Like, I don't believe that he's talking about, well, if you do something to simply meet a need for someone, then you're going to get another jewel in your crown. I don't think that's what he's talking about here. So what is this prize? Right, verse 4. So that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Well, what's that reward going to be? If it's not the warm and fuzzy for helping other people out, what is it? Is it that I'm going to get a nicer car? Cool. Right? I don't think that's what it is. Right? So what is this reward that we're truly after? And also, who's this reward for? During this whole series on the Sermon on the Mount, we've said it multiple times. Jesus is speaking to the Christian. He's speaking about someone's life who is a follower of his. Right? And so today, it's no different. When he's talking about giving to the poor, he's speaking to the believer. If you're here and you're not a believer yet, maybe a friend brought you, maybe you're trying to figure out, man, I'm trying to figure out my life and what do I believe about this? Does this mean that I can't participate in this? No. Right? But what does that mean? If you're not a believer yet, and we'll get into the reward for the believer. If you're not a believer yet and you are someone who meets needs, first of all, bless you for that. Right? You get to experience some of the reward, and that is you get to experience some of God's heart in giving to those in need. Right? Because this word giving here, it's a really interesting word. Right? This word giving that Jesus talks about here comes from the Hebrew word tzedakah, which ultimately comes from the word, has the same root as the word righteousness. So that means we are bringing rightness to the world. We are bringing God's favor and goodness to people. And if you're not a believer and you're giving to someone in need, you are participating in that, and that in and of itself is a reward. Right? You get to participate in bringing rightness to the world. But if you're not a believer, you don't get the full reward. Because the full reward for the believer is not just in giving God's rightness to the world, but it's an understanding that you have received God's righteousness from him. Right, what do I mean by that? You go all the way back to the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. If you guys were here with us, this is back in September at this point, the very first words out of Jesus' mouth from chapter 5, Jesus says, blessed are the, what? Does anyone remember the first blessed are the poor in spirit? Right? He's saying, blessed are you when you have nothing, and you recognize that when you had nothing, God gave you everything. Right? And that's the heart of the gospel story. The heart of the gospel story is that we were far from God. We had nothing. We were in desperate need of God's love. And God said, I'm going to die in your place. I'm going to adopt you as my child, and you've got forever with me. And now I want you to go, and I want you to give that righteousness to other people. And so when we meet needs of other people, the reward that we get is we get to practice alms, right? That alms, that's that same word, righteousness. That's the word that we translate into giving. When we give to those in need, we are giving God's rightness to the world out of a received righteousness from God. So the gift that we get is we get to be like our Father, right? And that is a gift for the believer. Right? If you're here today and you're not a believer and you've gotten to experience some of this, like, man, it does feel good, but I don't know that it feels amazing. The invitation today is to say, hey, God sees you in your great need and he wants to give you eternal life with him. And when you receive that, when you know that you had nothing and God gave you everything, absolutely you're going to give a life of generosity. You're going to live a life that says, I see people in their needs, and like God saw me, I'm going to love people where they are. So for the believer, if you've been struggling with your generosity, the reminder for us is that Jesus gave us everything when we had nothing. And he calls us to go live that life out. If you're not a believer yet, and you've gotten to experience some of this, I would say Jesus has everything to give you. Would you ask him, hey, show me what this looks like? I'm wanting to know more. Like maybe grab a friend this week and say, hey, could you sit down and tell me the story of Christianity? Could you fully explain to me, what does it mean that I have nothing and God has everything to offer me? Come talk to me afterwards. Come talk to someone who would love to stand, who will be praying, standing at the windows out there. But at the end of the day, this gift that God gives, and this gift, this reward, is all about being with him. And that invitation is for all. as we finish up, we're trying to do a better job at having some time to journal. It's our theme for the year. We don't just want to be people who hear something, but we want to be people who make a plan. What do I do with the things that I'm told? Some of you guys brought journals. If you didn't bring a journal, that's okay. I got a stack up here. If you want to grab one here in a minute, you can grab one. If you want to grab a sheet of paper in the seat in front of you, there's little note cards. I want you to spend some time reflecting on some of these things that we've taught. Right? I've got a few prompt questions up here. Why don't you throw them up here? We'll have some time for this. And then I want to challenge you. Share this with someone this week. Right? Maybe it's today after church. Like, share with someone what you wrote down. Share with someone what you thought. Maybe you're not a writer. I get it. Maybe you're just processing. Share with someone what God's challenging you to do this week. So I'm going to pray. We're going to have some time to reflect, and then the band's going to lead us in song. Father God, thank you for an opportunity to come before you and say, hey, how am I tempted to live my life out loud, not for your glory, but for mine? God, where am I tempted to be quiet? And you're challenging me, no, I want you to speak up. Particularly today, as you invite us to live out your rightness in the world, to meet needs to those who have less than us. God, show us where those needs are. God, and as we do our best to be wildly generous like you are to us, God, I pray that we would have your heart, and I pray that we would receive, God, that we would receive the understanding of what it's like to be loved when we have nothing, and that we could give when now we have everything. Lord, for those of us who are struggling with being stingy, God, would you give us a spirit of generosity? God, for anyone in the room right now who doesn't know you yet and who's trying to figure out, what does this mean? God, I'll simply say that all of us on our own have chosen a life apart from you. And we've said, I don't want you, God. I want to be my own God. And that separates us now, and it separates us from eternity from you. God, but to be reunited to you, we simply have to say, God, I am sorry for my rebellion against you. I believe that you love me and you've died in my place for that rebellion. And God, I repent and confess, and I want to live my life with you now. God, and I want to receive even though I have nothing. And now I want to live my life marked with radical generosity. Lord, help us to live a life as sons and daughters of you. We love you, Jesus. Amen. Love you guys. Take some time to respond in some journal time.